aboard as we take to the high seas this week for a look at ultra-modern water travel with a trip on the new Royal Sealink Express. Good evening and welcome to Red's Classic Theater. As you can see, we're aboard the Sealink Express. We're going to show you some of the features of the Sealink and why it's become a popular alternative to flying or taking a ferry between the lower mainland and Vancouver Island. Our movie this week is the 1982 production, The Verdict, starring Paul Newman. 20th Century Fox shelled out $14 million for the production, banking on Paul Newman's charisma and proven box office appeal. And Newman did not disappoint them, turning in one of his best ever performances as a down-and-out Boston lawyer. And the studio raked in $27 million in ticket sales in the process. And now, here is Act One of The Verdict, starring Paul Newman and James Mason. We're enjoying a trip on the Royal Sealink Express, traveling from downtown Vancouver to downtown Victoria this week on Red's Classic Theater. Now, this is one of two Norwegian-built 130-foot vessels that began operating between Vancouver and Victoria in February, and a run between Vancouver and Nanaimo will begin soon. Now, these are jet-propelled catamarans that actually skim the surface of the water instead of plowing through it. The boat's aerodynamic twin-hull design and water propulsion system offer a smooth, quiet ride. And with a top speed of 37 knots, the Royal Sealink Express can make the 135-kilometer run in about 2.5 hours. And besides the outstanding scenery, Royal Sealink has added some creature comforts to make the trip even more enjoyable. And we'll be back in a moment to tell you about them. The upper and lower lounges aboard the Royal Sealink Express have seating for 302 passengers. Among the amenities are adjustable seats, individual multi-channel music system, onboard movies, and a snack galley. There's also a children's play area, and for the business traveler, telephone and fax facilities combined with a spacious work area. It certainly makes the Sealink a new wave in water travel. And now let's return to Paul Newman in The Verdict. Hope you're enjoying The Verdict on Red's Classic Theater. As the director of tonight's motion picture, Sidney Lumet was responsible for the assembly and the guidance of tonight's ensemble. It's also interesting to note that Sidney Lumet played a part in the careers of 3 of tonight's 4 major stars. Jack Warden and Lumet had previously made 3 films together, 12 Angry Men in 1957. Now, this was Lumet's first film as a director, and one for which he received an Oscar nomination. And also, That Kind of Woman with Sophia Loren in 1959, and Bye Bye Braverman with George Segal in 1968. Co-star James Mason first worked with Sidney Lumet during TV's golden age in the early 50s, and later in 2 films, The Deadly Affair and The Seagull. Paul Newman and Lumet worked together only once before The Verdict, and that was for a 1970 film documentary about Martin Luther King Jr. Only lead actress Charlotte Rampling had never worked with director Sidney Lumet before. However, she had appeared in a film with one of her co-stars. She appeared in her first film role with James Mason in Georgie Girl in 1966. And now back to Sidney Lumet's ensemble cast in The Verdict. We're here at the beautiful Inner Harbor in Victoria on the first leg of our round-trip excursion between Vancouver and Victoria, and time to look at our mailbag. Kathy Simard from Surrey requested on Moonlight Bay, starring Doris Day and Gordon McRae. And Lee Hunseth from Chilliwack would like to see The Family Way, starring John and Haley Mills. And by the way, we're open to your suggestions of locations like Victoria and suggestions for motion pictures. Drop a note to yours truly, Red Robinson, KVUS TV in Vancouver. That's Red Robinson, KVUS TV in Vancouver. Now join us next Sunday night on Red's Classic Theater for Elvis Presley's movie debut in the 1956 Civil War tale, Love Me Tender. And 2 weeks from tonight, Gary Cooper and Anna Stern star in the 1935 classic, The Wedding Night. And now back to The Verdict, starring Paul Newman. Hope you're enjoying The Verdict, starring Paul Newman on Red's Classic Theater. Besides his status as an actor of the highest rank, Paul Newman is a producer, a director, a political activist, and a race car driver and owner. Long admired by female movie fans for his good looks and piercing blue eyes, Paul Newman is one of Hollywood's happiest and longest married men. Since 1958, he's been married to actress Joanne Woodward. However, Newman's on and off screen success has been tinged with sadness and tragedy as well. First, he relied on analysis to combat a failed first marriage and a drinking problem, that surfaced after his overnight stardom in the movie Somebody Up There Likes Me. And then in 1978, his first and only son, Scott, died from a drug and alcohol overdose. Since then, Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman have campaigned vigorously against drug abuse, forming the Scott Newman Foundation. And now let's get back to The Verdict, starring Paul Newman. And aboard the Royal Sealink, time for a movie trivia quiz. I'm up here on the bridge with the captain. And our question this week revolves around Paul Newman and Robert Redford, co-starring in one of the most successful westerns ever, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, back in the 1960s. 4 years later, they teamed up in another hit movie. Can you name it? We'll be back with the answer in just a moment. Here's the answer to our movie trivia quiz. 4 years after making Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Paul Newman and Robert Redford teamed up for the very successful motion picture, The Sting. It earned $18 million for the studio. 10 years later, that very same studio tried a sequel starring Jackie Gleason and Mac Davis. Needless to say, it bombed at the box office. Now let's get back to Paul Newman in The Verdict. Well, that's a wrap for this week's edition of Red's Classic Theater. I hope you enjoyed The Verdict starring Paul Newman. Be sure to join us next Sunday night on Red's Classic Theater for Elvis's debut movie, Love Me Tender. This stars Richard Egan and Deborah Paget, along with Elvis Presley. In the meantime, if there's a motion picture you'd like to see, or a location like the Sealink, drop a line to yours truly, Red Robinson, KVUS-TV in Vancouver. We'd like to thank Michelle Varley, who is the Public Relations Director of Sealink, and our good friend Brian Payton for inviting us aboard the Sealink. And if you'd like a wonderful trip on Sealink between here and Victoria and back, you can call 687-6925. And be sure to join us next Sunday night on Red's Classic Theater for Love Me Tender starring Elvis Presley. Until then, right here from the dock in Vancouver of the Sealink Express, thank you for being with us, and good night, everybody.